Now remember that in these books, what I'm telling is the ancestor side of the medallion. Simultaneously, for those of you who've read the books, you know that there's a modern um, series of episodes going on with Juan and Sofia Valdez, who have come into possession of the medallion in about 1995. So they're having uh, situations with the medallion while great grandfather is narrating the ancestors' experiences with the medallion. So Cuto woke in the dark, and the medallion was hot. He and Ria had been making trips up to the uh, cliff dwellings for some weeks and had been up on the desert floor, and there had been no sign of conquistadors. And Feather had indicated that certainly the conquistadors would think that the Indians had all fled to the mountains in the south. And little did Cuto know, of course, that Marquez had expanded one patrol much further to the east than they ever went and had spotted, um, had found the canyon and spotted uh, two riders bringing in a deer into the hidden canyon. So it was night, and Cuto woke up, and the medallion was hot. And in the weeks that had passed, they had built, they being Cuto and Ria, and the five Aztecs, had built three small whitewashed houses along the stream, and gardens, vegetable gardens, because these Aztecs were all gardeners. Even Cuto, who disliked gardening, liked hunting much better, but they were all gardeners. And they had managed to get flowers growing around the houses, and they'd managed to have um, gardens, create gardens with diversion, irrigation diversion off the creek around the houses and into the gardens. And stuff was starting to come up. They'd been there several weeks now, and every week Cuto and Ria had gone up to the cliff dwelling and checked in on them. And in the time they weren't gardening, of course, they were all learning to ride. And Ria had become the teacher. So the medallion was hot, it was dark. And Cuto reached over and touched Ria's shoulder and said, "There's danger. Get up and get Swallow and get outside." And in a minute, and he grabbed even in the dark, he knew where this stuff was, grabbed his armor shirt and sling and headed to the next little house where the Aztecs were sleeping and woke them up. Told uh, told them that there was danger and to follow him. And took off. And they had spent enough time now. He knew the entrance crack through the cliffs really, really well. And he shot along the stream. The stream flowed through the entrance crack out into the big canyon and down to the main stream. He flew along, and Expo was right behind him. And they got to the front of the entrance crack and stopped, and it was in deep shadow. And Cuto gave the soft hoot of an owl, because Coyote was in a pile of rocks to the left of the entrance, which they had cleverly shaped into a kind of a guard station. And you could look out from those rocks, from a little sort of a place in the rocks that they had made. You could look out but couldn't be seen. There was no answer to his hoot. So either Cuto was compromised or he'd been killed. And Cuto was edging out of the shadow that the rim provided when he saw a reflection of light from the stars on what he realized was a sword blade out by the watch rocks. And he backed back into the shadows and looked over to the main stream, which was about 300 yards away, and he saw a whole bunch of shapes over there, but he couldn't make them out. But he did see the reflection of starlight off a sword blade, and then he heard a clank as another sword brushed a rock. And he realized that the conquistadors had found him, and they were right outside the crack in the dark. And he didn't know whether they were going to attack or not, but Expo was right behind him. And he said, he turned to him and whispered, "Get Swallow, who was visiting them, Swallow and Rhea, and take them up to the rim. Take them to the cave and up the cave to the rim. And be prepared up there." And before Expo said anything, there was a soft touch on his shoulder, and Rhea's voice whispered, "We're on our way, my love. You be careful. We'll be watching from above." And he didn't even know she'd followed him down the crack. But anyway, there was a soft sound in the sand as Expo and Rhea and Swallow took off, because Swallow had come with Rhea, took off and ran back through the crack. When they got to the canyon, the black stallion was close. The horses were close. And Rhea very calmly walked up to the black stallion, and a second had a hackamore bridle on the stallion, and Expo had a hackamore bridle on a pinto standing there. And Rhea swung Swallow up on the black and got on herself, and in minutes they were racing up the canyon, up the valley, to the cave. They got to the cave and turned the horses loose and went into, at the edge of the cave, there was a pile of torches that Cuto had supplied there, and very quickly they made a fire and lit 3 torches and went into the cave. Went right to the back of the cave. They had practiced this over and over. So against the idea that they'd someday be found and have to escape out of the valley. So they went right to the back of the cave, turned left, went down the little sort of separation in the rock to the stream, and Swallow was first. They held the torches. She found the handholds and footholds and started up, and Rhea was next, and Expo kept the 3 torches and leaned them against the rock so they gave some light, and he started up, and in 15 minutes all of them were on top of the rim, coming out of the pile of rocks that disguised the entrance onto the rim. And 15 minutes later, they were all on their stomachs, looking down 200 feet at the entrance area below. And nothing was going on. So they knew the conquistadors had not attacked. And in fact, Lieutenant Marquez had decided that he was going to wait until dawn because he didn't want any of the Indians that he knew were in this canyon to escape. So he wanted to be able to exterminate the entire group, however big it was. So he was going to wait until dawn. Now, what he had done the day before was a lot of new recruits had come into Santa Fe, but there was still a group of sort of demented, crazed conquistadors that were loyal to him. And these new recruits had come in, but he had kind of kept these other men close to him. And when he came back from having seen the hunters in the canyon, he gathered about 15 men, and they were all, um, you know, sworn to secrecy and all bloodthirsty, not interested in the friars' uh, directions to make, to be peaceful with the Indians. These guys all wanted to kill Indians and torture them and kill them, and they had in the past. But they had to be kind of quiet about it now because the friars were very powerful. Father Montoya was a very powerful man. So what Marquez did was he told the commanding officer he was going on a hunting expedition. And that morning, 15 of them with Marquez left, no armor, carrying hunting lances with swords and a blunderbuss wrapped in clothes at the back of their saddles. And they took off out into the desert on what was to be a hunting expedition. By the end of the day, they had found the very, very steep trail, game trail, down into the main canyon and had led their horses down. And just at dark, they had gotten to where the crack was, and they tied all their horses, hobbled and tied all their horses along the stream and advanced in the dark to the crack that led to the hidden valley. But Marquez wanted to wait for dawn because, as I said, he wanted to kill every single, he didn't want any of them to escape. He wanted to exterminate them. So he was waiting for dawn. And Swallow and Rhea and Expill up on the rim realized there was no fighting going on, so that the conquistadors, and they could see them as the light, it started to get a little bit lighter, they could see the 15 men gathered just outside the entry rocks. They couldn't see, as it developed, they could finally see the Cuto was hidden in the entry rocks, but these conquistadors were outside of the rocks, just waiting for it to get light. Down in the shadows of the crack, Cuto and the other three, because Expo was up on top, Cuto was in the rocks. Cuto and the other three were in the shadows waiting, and Cuto realized that Marquez was waiting for light. And gradually, it got lighter and lighter, and the canyon came into definition, and Marquez decided he was going to do a mounted attack, so he sent 4 men back to the stream to get the horses. And Cuto realized exactly what he was doing. Now, up on the rim, Rhea had seen these 15 horses. They could clearly see out into the valley, and she was so excited. 15 horses would nearly triple the size of their herd. So she was really excited. But when she saw the 4 men, the 4 conquistadors starting for the horses, she told Expo, "You gotta tell Cuto." And Expo hooted like a great horned owl, but Cuto didn't need it. He knew exactly what was going on. So he talked to the other 2, gave all the weapons to the other 2 Aztecs, and told them to take the weapons, and they were going to execute a plan they had made long ago and go to the other end of the crack with all the weapons. And they took off. And Marquez was thinking, man, this is great. We're going to annihilate who's ever in this canyon. And just at that moment, loud, raucous singing sounded out. And out of the shadows came two Indians, arms around each other's shoulders, staggering, drunk as skunks, staggering and singing at the top of their lungs, staggering this way, staggering that way, staggering at the top of their lungs. And Marquez yelled at his four men to come back, changed his plans completely, yelled at his four men to come back, and with a roar charged with his sword, with the, what would it be, 11 men following him, 4 bringing up the rear, charged at these two drunken Indians. And they stopped in their paces, and their eyes got big around, and their mouths opened wide, and all of a sudden, stumbling and scrambling in the sand, they turned around screaming at the top of their lungs and ran back into the crack, pursued by Marquez and his 11 guys with the 4 men catching up right behind him. And it was, as they chased these drunks down the canyon, it was odd because they could almost get within a swipe of a sword at them, but these drunks just managed somehow just to keep a sword length away. And a couple of them threw lances, but the canyon twisted and turned, so the swords just bounced, the lances bounced harmlessly off the walls. And the 2 Indians were shrieking and screaming and hollering, and Marquez and his men were racing after them. And all of a sudden, something snapped in Marquez's brain, and he let out a blood-curdling scream that was just like a maniac. And his men all did the same and put on a burst of speed and rounded a corner, and there, 50 yards ahead, was the opening into the valley. Now up on the rim, Rhea and Expel and Swallow had been lying on their stomachs beside a 5-foot-high, 40-foot-long pile of rocks piled along the rim. And in the weeks that they'd been there, Cuto, remembering Adzul's description of how they defensed mounted conquistadors, he and the men had constructed 3 piles of these rocks, 5 feet high, 40 feet long, 1 at each end of the crack and 1 in the middle. They were piled on logs that were cleverly balanced with 2 long poles sticking out backwards and up in the air under these logs piled high with these rocks. Well, as the chase started down the crack, Rhea and Swallow and Expel leaped to their feet and tracked the chase, because they could see down into they could dimly see down into the crack, and they followed from above the chase down the crack. And they got to the last pile of rocks, and Expel and Swallow took their places at these 2 long poles sticking out into the desert from under the logs that the rocks were piled on. And Rhea kneeled at the top of the crack with one arm up in the air. Well, Marquez and the men, when they saw they rounded the last corner and saw the opening into the canyon 50 yards away, just went crazy and all bunched up and charged, only to be met by deadly spears, point blank thrown by atlatls that killed 4 men on the spot. And what they hadn't noticed was that the 2 drunks had suddenly, they disappeared in the last 60, 70 yards. It kind of disappeared. Well, what had happened was Cuto and Mazatul had joined the others, grabbed atlatls, and turned, and the 4 of them fired a barrage of atlatls right point blank into these men, killed 4 of them right on the spot. The others scrambled and started to try to back up and get out of the way, and the Aztecs loaded 4 more, and 4 more conquistadors went down because they had no armor. They had disguised themselves just for a hunting expedition. And they went down, and the rest of them, the 7 of them, and Marquez scrambled, fighting, trampling on the wounded to get around the last corner and protection from the rock. Marquez got 2 men between him and the atlatls. He had just barely missed being skewered by an atlatl spear on the first volley by turning sideways, and it went through his shirt and into the man behind him, killed the man outright. So they all assembled behind this corner, and Marquez, he may have gone crazy, but he was also very cunning, and he told the men to go after him, and the men wouldn't go. And Marquez said, "You fool, we outnumber them, go!" They wouldn't go. And he peers around the corner, and the 4 spearmen are fleeing. They're racing out of the crack into the valley. And he goes, they're escaping. Get after them. And they all, and he grabs the blunderbuss from the soldier that held it, grabs it, and he said, "I'll show you what to do." And he races out into the open area where all these bodies were from the first group of spears, first 2 shots of spears coming at him, and aims the blunderbuss and fires it. And there's this huge, blunderbuss is an old kind of musket, huge flame shoots out of it and a big cloud of white smoke. And Marquez notices that one of the fleeing spearmen goes down. And in his crazed mode, he suddenly realizes it's gotten quite dark in the crack, and he looks up as several tons of rock pour down into the crack off the rim with an enormous roar, and a huge cloud of gray dust billows out from the crack into the canyon. And that's where we'll end the story for today. Now, most of you who've watched this are out of school, so I'm not going to do a writing. I ended this in a way that there's no writing. You can guess what happened. There's no writing exercise to be done. But the book isn't over. And we have some more episodes to develop to get to the end of the book. So hang around and watch for episode 8.